Hey, David Brewster here with an episode of Chordplay, and this is a Rockabilly Guitar Primer. And I have to admit, there's a lot of requests and messages that I've received since I've started this channel, and some of the requests have really caught me off guard. And that's a good thing. I kind of expected, certain players and certain bands, but then I noticed just in the last few months, I've had a lot of requests for Brian Setzer. I've had requests for Rockabilly. I've even had some surf, guitar requests. So when I started to notice, the Brian Setzer and Rockabilly, popping up, I got excited. I thought, yeah, that's cool. That's, very different and kind of a left turn or whatever from, some of the stuff that I've kind of featured and covered so far. And there's a lot you can learn from studying, older forms of music, and you can bring it, into the modern world. And definitely Rockabilly is, a very interesting and kind of unusual, style of music. Literally, it exploded back in the 50s, and you had, Gene Vincent and Carl Perkins and all these, early kind of pioneers of Rockabilly. And literally the name Rockabilly comes from combining rock with country. And you have to think back in the 30s and 40s, people used the term country, but most people at that time, when they referred to country music, they normally said hillbilly music. So when these musicians started to kind of vamp up, country music ideas, and they incorporated rock and drums and these big sounds, they literally merged rock and country, or rockabilly. And for those of you that really aren't aware, rockabilly is extremely influential, especially those early days of rock and roll, when you had Elvis and Chuck Berry and Little Richard and, artists like that. But then you had this kind of twangy, country influence and, borrowing elements from country and bluegrass and some other styles. And there's a certain guitar legend that I'm a huge fan of that loves rockabilly. And he also loves working on hot rods too. And of course that's, Jeff Beck up there. And, I'm a massive Jeff Beck fan. And he even released, a whole album as a tribute to Gene Vincent, the album Crazy Legs. And there's a ton of, great songs and moments on that album. But then even, more of a modern kind of rockabilly hero, Brian Setzer and the Stray Cats. That's some phenomenal music. And Brian is definitely, just a monster guitar player. His chord vocabulary and the licks and the tones and the classic, guitars that he plays, usually a Gretsch and, giant, guitars that most people think of as jazz guitars. But he's been rocking those, since the late 70s. And there's just something about that kind of attitude and the greaser, kind of image and everything. And you've got the skulls and the dice and the hot rods and all this stuff. And it's really cool, and if you're a metalhead or a punk fan, if you were alive in the 50s, you would have been a rockabilly fan because obviously punk and metal didn't exist in the 1950s, but rockabilly did. And it was kind of it was an edgy kind of underworld that a lot of people just fell in love with because it was, energetic, full of this big, kind of massive sound. And they were really pushing, music forward and trying to tap into something new. And at that time, nobody had heard music like that. And of course, now you can go back and you can listen through, the 50s. Rockabilly kind of dried up like around the early 60s, and there's a, number of reasons why. And then it had a big resurgence in the late 70s and the 80s. It kind of had another resurgence in the 90s, thanks to people like Brian Setzer. And there's a ton of, rockabilly artists. There's Psychobilly. I've even noticed, what is it, Gothabilly, where it's like goth rock with rockabilly mixed together, which is really unusual, but it's cool. All right, with the opening riff that I played, that's not actually a rockabilly song. That's just kind of in the style of rockabilly guitar. And I've had that kind of, tucked away under my belt or whatever for a long time. And I remember, when I was younger, I could play rock, I could play some metal, I could play some blues and some simple, country. And I was trying to like come up with things where if I was testing out a guitar or if somebody like a student or a friend or something, if somebody asked, hey, can you play some rockabilly? I just kind of made up, like a riff, and to me it sounded, rather authentic. And I've shown it to students, and I've kind of had that, like I said, tucked away for a long time. And I have some things like that, reggae guitar and some surf guitar and funk and all these different things, and I've kind of created, in the style of kind of riffs and ideas. And we're going to look at that, but we're also going to break down some kind of slick, rockabilly chord moves. And then near the end, we're actually going to tap into a little bit of Stray Cats too, because the Stray Cats are awesome. But as far as the intro, that jam, it's really just a 1-4-5 in the E minor. So the chords, first we're going to hit the chords. E minor, then it moves to A minor, and then eventually it's going to hit a B11. Just think of, B7, but don't add that F sharp there on the high E string. Just play the high E open, and you'll have that B11. Now the other thing that was going on, because I was allowing those chords to ring, right? But I also had that kind of double-picked bass line, and that was the part that I felt like, wow, that really makes it sound like rockabilly to me. And really what you want to do is you want the chord to continue to ring while you're adding, that lower kind of bass part. And, once you understand where the chords are, then you need to work on doing this. Put that together, and I love working on stuff like that where you're kind of playing two parts at the same time, the chord part and the bass part. And so it's something like this, slower. And then right there, I'm just moving to C7 and then back to B7. And then you just repeat it again. And at the end, you probably noticed that little kind of familiar rockabilly lick, and it's just open string pull-offs, which a lot of those ideas actually were inspired by Les Paul. And, rock guitarist, blues guitarist, jazz guitarist, rockabilly guitarist, even surf guitarist, were all influenced by Les Paul. And Les had a million, open string pull-off licks that he was whipping out a very long time ago. But that lick, it's something like this. I basically just chime that 5th fret harmonic on the D, G, B, and high E strings with the low E ringing. That creates technically an E minor 7 chord, but it's, one open string and 4 harmonics. Something like that. And you can bend your neck slightly, or if you've got a bar or, a Bigsby or something, you can definitely kind of dip it on that harmonic. But that's very kind of a trademark rockabilly lick and chord sequence too. If you dive in and start studying, some rockabilly music, you're going to notice quite a few things. But one thing you're going to notice for sure are some kind of daring and bold chord movements. And a lot of rockabilly music, is centered around just basic, 1-4-5 progressions. And there's other progressions too. But you can kind of look at it as a blues, form, but it's using more kind of jazz tonalities. There's a lot of 6th chords and 13ths, and 9ths and flat 9s, and a lot of interesting things happening, so it's not really a standard, 1-4-5. It's kind of dressed up, and you can find a lot of interesting things happening. Now, one thing, this is kind of a trademark or signature, rockabilly move, but that's including, augmented chords. And most people, especially if you're a rock or blues guitarist, you probably rarely venture over toward augmented. It's a very interesting kind of sinister, sound. Buckethead uses it, jazz and fusion guitarists and classical music uses it. But here we're finding it, in rockabilly music. So think of something like the intro to Stray Cat Strut, by the Stray Cats, like this. And just having that, G augmented right there is what that is. It's really interesting to kind of find that pop out, in your ear, definitely catches that, and it's like, what in the world, happens? Just having that kind of sinister sound based around something like that. Really interesting to hear that, kind of hiding in that chord progression. Now, another thing that's interesting is you'll find a lot of 13th chords and 6th chords in rockabilly. So let's move to the key of A, and let's say we're going to move from the 1 chord to the 4 chord. Now you could just play, maybe like an A13 like this, and then you could just move to D13, right? A 1-4 in A. But that's a little bit too boring. Rockabilly guitarists, they want energy and excitement and these kind of chord explosions, I guess. So, this is kind of a signature rockabilly tag with chords. And there we're taking that A13, moving it down to A flat 13, and then we just start moving up chromatically until you hit that D13. Almost sounds like something you'd hear like on Bugs Bunny or Looney Tunes or something like that. It has a very playful and just different sound, and it grabs your attention. If you hear somebody playing that, you're gonna look over and think, what in the world is that? And that's way more interesting than just moving to the chord. Just moving A13 to D13 is fine, but it's not very exciting. But this, it grabs your attention. Up next, I'm going to show you a Rockabilly Turnaround, and I just recently did an entire Chordplay, episode dedicated to turnarounds, and I'm just nicknaming this the Rockabilly Turnaround. But this is another interesting kind of chromatic idea, centered around chords, and it really just grabs your attention once again, where it's like, wow, what in the world was that? And it looks like this. And there's some interesting things happening here, and this is basically in the key of G. It's kind of ending, on this chromatic move, and it ends on that G13 right there. But you can see we're moving these like triads chromatically, and we're moving, 3 times, and we're just kind of outlining this progression. So the other thing that's important here is to realize what the bass line or the bass notes would be, because the bass is going to be moving chromatically, D, D flat to C, or you can think of that as a C sharp too, and then C, B to B flat, and then F, F sharp to G. And then chord-wise, like way up here, that's going to be a D6. If you think of, D like a bass note or the root note. So a D6, and then a D minor major 7 sharp 5, and then D7 sus2. So that's all over D right there. And that middle chord's really unusual. D minor major 7 sharp 5. But it's a passing, kind of a passing chord in a way. And then right there, we're basically just using like a 1-finger bar, but over C, those chords are technically, that's a C major 7 sus2 flat 5. Very interesting. C major 13, and then C6. And you're going to find a lot of 6th chords in rockabilly music. So we got that. basically start right here, you know, where we ended before in D. And we're going to basically move that chromatically. And that's over C too. Let's see. And that's creating some interesting tonalities there. C6, or yeah, C6, C minor major 7 sharp 5, and then that C7 sus2. So it's mimicking the same thing we had in D, but now it's over C. And then now we're moving to B flat, technically. And it's important to remember those bass notes. And at the end, we're just moving, you know, F13, F sharp 13 to a G13. Right? So one more time there. Alright, up next I'm going to show you a Rockabilly chord lead, and that's another nickname I'm giving it. And you can definitely find, you know, guitarists soloing using, you know, chord fragments and chord fingerings as a guide, but they use the chords melodically, you know, as a solo. And you can definitely hear that in jazz. There's tons of jazz guitarists that have kind of channeled that. But you can find that in early rock and roll for sure. I mean, reggae music and soul music, there's a whole bunch of, you know, styles of music that kind of use chords, but in a melodic kind of lead way. And this is interesting. So we're going to be hitting a 1-4-5 in G, but we're going to be doing this, you know, kind of bouncy, playful, you know, guitar part like this. Right there, I'm basically just, you could also play that without the third and pinky. Some people just play that and they just smash, you know, the third finger down and bar. But that's basically G, and then you're playing a C over G, technically. And then you're going to slide up to this, and that's implying, you know, G7. So right there with this, you're basically playing with, you know, G, a C over G, and G7. And then do the same thing up here in the key of C. You know, C major, F over C, and C7. Go back to G. And then just dance between, you know, G and, or I'm sorry, D and G over D. And then back to C and F over C. And then go back to G. And just end, you know, on D7 right there. But that's kind of a cool, you know, different way of approaching a lead. And you can definitely pick up ideas like that by going back in time and studying some of the habits and playing of, you know, guitarists from the 40s and the 50s. And then you can definitely find guitarists still doing that today. But it's interesting to kind of go back to the source and notice like where it came from. All right, now we're going to visit some Stray Cats music, and definitely the Stray Cats are amazing. I've loved their music since I was a little kid, and they used to play it on the radio a lot. And I had no idea what Rockabilly was. I had no idea who Gene Vincent or Carl Perkins or any of these people, but I knew who the Stray Cats were for sure. And this is, you know, I kind of hit this a minute ago when I was talking about augmented chords, you know, appearing in Rockabilly. So Stray Cat Strut is you know, built around C minor. You've got this descending, you know, kind of chord progression. And we're going to look at the bridge, but just to kind of help you get an idea of where we are in the song, you know, this would be the kind of main vamp. And when you get to the bridge, it starts with this F minor 7. And it kind of moves to an F minor 9 right there. So I want to look at that little chord progression there. F minor 7, and then F minor 9. and then it moves back to C minor. And he starts kind of playing with the 9th up there, and then back to that F minor 7. And go to D7. And then this last chord, this is really unusual. It's a G7 flat 9 flat 13. Very tension-filled chord, but it sounds perfect in that bridge section. Really cool and daring too. Once again, throwing that chord out. That takes some guts right there to just chime that. The most tense chord in that entire progression, and he's emphasizing and accenting it. But the last example is going to come from "Rock This Town," which is another Stray Cats classic song, very famous, very popular, and I've shown this to students a lot over the years too. It's just a really cool kind of classic rockabilly song. And what we're going to be doing here, well, let me play through it first. It's basically the chorus. Right? There's a lot of changes happening here too. So it starts with the boogie woogie kind of rock, kind of blues riff. And then he's basically, emphasizing and just drawing all this attention to this part over A. And there you've got, A major. And it's going to move over basically to an A augmented sus2, sus4. And then A diminished 7. And then A7. So you're, playing this triad and then moving this triad up, chromatically. But it creates that really interesting progression. But then he's basically tremolo strumming it there. And basically move over just to a regular D major. And he's kind of implying, like a D9 right there. Sliding, from the 4th fret into the 5th fret on that bar. On the G, B, and high E strings. And then basically move back here, there's G and a G6 hiding right there. And then E7. Back to D. And then A and A6. And then he's doing that really common kind of 50s boogie woogie, line. One more time right there. So cool, great song too. That's going to wrap this Rockabilly Guitar Primer, and definitely Rockabilly's fun and interesting, very uplifting and kind of positive style of music, and it's really hard to not turn it up and kind of start tapping your foot or singing along or just kind of getting into it, because it's rhythmic and it's aggressive, and there's a lot of interesting things kind of hiding in this long kind of discovered and almost forgotten, but it's returned in popularity over the decades since it first appeared. And it's really cool, it's really different. If you feel kind of stale with your normal, practice and listening habits, diving into something like Rockabilly is really going to shake things up. It's kind of forcing you to play things that maybe you're not really comfortable with, or chords that you're not that familiar with, and it's a good challenge, just to try it out and see what happens. Who knows, you might fall in love with it and buy a giant Gretsch, slick your hair back and buy a hot rod, and the next thing you know, people are calling you like Crazy Eddie or whatever. But it's pretty fun and it's interesting. Brian Setzer is definitely a monster guitarist, but all of the new guitarists I showed in that image earlier, and the influence from this style of music, you can definitely catch, what it kind of did to Jeff Beck, because Jeff Beck's definitely a huge blues fan, but he loves rockabilly. So when you hear Jeff play something more traditional sounding, he's probably falling back on some of his blues and rock, influence. But I have a firm, belief that some of those weird tonalities, bending certain notes into kind of an unusual note choice, and some of the phrases and things that he plays when he takes a solo. I think some of that came from studying and working on rockabilly, when he was younger. So coming out of the gate, he was a little bit twisted compared to just your standard, blues or rock guitarist. And he had that rockabilly kind of influence in his back pocket, which is really cool. So anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.